Good morning, and my thanks to Fasecolta for this invitation. Arturo has put the bar very high, so let me clarify two things before I start. The official title in the program is automatic underwriting, and I don't want to translate streamline underwriting as automatic underwriting. One of the purposes of my talk is that each one of you at the end of my talk will have thought of what word to use. It's not simplified. I'm not sure as to whether it is automatic, but we can discuss it. Don't worry, I won't be repeating what Arturo said. And what I want to do, which was not mentioned, is the following. For 8 months, I've been responsible for the strategy of the consulting business in North America. So throughout these 8 months, I've had to work with my colleagues both in the United States and Canada. So I will focus on the implementation of streamline underwriting throughout these presentation, the streamline underwriting in the U.S. market. They've been doing that for some years now. So let me tell you what they have found, what they have bumped against, and what cons and what pros and cons they have found. And I'll also tackle the topic without talking about digitalization in such a wide range. I'll talk about it in a more conceptual way. So no worries, we won't torture you with the same thing all over again. So my talk is divided in three parts. The first part, what is streamline underwriting? What is it really? What has happened in the market in the United States in this regard? And how would I implement this in my business? So what is it? I think that perhaps something has been mentioned already, and it's somewhat similar to what Arturo defined as automatic underwriting. Perhaps there are some differences, or I would put it together in a different way. But it means to replicate a normal underwriting process with less or different requirements. So we're going to be getting rid of the blood work and urine tests and medical tests. But above all, this is about beginning to use new sources of information or else using information in a different way. All this based on the very famous predictive analysis or data analytics, okay? So here, and this is where I have a doubt as to whether calling it automatic or not, because the underwriting can be done completely or partially automated. And the participation of the underwriter physically is reduced or is focused on very specific topics, like in the management of complicated cases, or in the definition of some details, or in reviewing the model. Something that we have to take into account, and this comment would apply for any of the slides here, would be the fact that models do not have a life of their own. I can create a perfectly technical model because if I put it to function without human expertise, I would get just silly results out of it. So what are the benefits that have been seen in the use of streamlined underwriting in the U.S. market? The first one is the speed to close deals, to close businesses, the speed to reach out to the public and close deals. The percentage of policies that are closed between application and the end of it is much less, because apart from getting rid of the blood works and medical visits, which may be time consuming and troublesome, I go from a 2 month underwriting process to 2 or 3 days. Hence the title of my talk, how to use streamlined underwriting to enhance the purchasing experience. That's the real approach that we want to have here in this talk. And the second important benefit is clearly the consumer experience, which is infinitely better. I don't have to go to the doctor. I don't have to go for a visit. I don't have to go for blood works or urine tests. I can fill out an application online. Now, many times it is still done through humans, but in the future, this is definitely a step towards digitalization. This is the way in which underwriting will be done when policies start to be sold through digital media. And then the third big benefit is the increase in sales and in profits. It's just obvious that this type of underwriting will bring about a very important cost reduction and expense reduction. And apart from being able to close more policies, well, you have an increase in sales. Apart from the fact that you can access more markets, not the markets that would go for the full traditional process, or those that do not come because they're not interested in this very lengthy process. So other benefits that are also relevant are the following. Even though mortality deteriorates a little bit vis-a-vis the mortality that you have if you went through a full-fledged process, you nonetheless have a better experience than if you followed a simplified underwriting process. This is not simplified. We're talking about substituting or replacing. We're not avoiding anything. And this may sound for many companies as something that only the giants of insurance could apply. And I agree with Arturo. This is for everyone. Middle-sized companies are being able to implement this type of streamlined underwriting thanks to the support from reinsurers, especially. So for us to have an idea of how this full-fledged underwriting process compares to the streamlined process regarding the main sources of information, well, Arturo touched on this. It changes all the way from the form of the application because of the type of questions that are posed and because of the way in which the questions are made. And it also changes because of the order followed in the questions. You even start to use specialized psychologists, specialized in human behavior, to define what to ask and how to ask it. It's no longer a standard format for all, definitely. We also see a change in that you're using medical decisions in the United States for certain age ranges or for certain products. It's common practice to ask for the doctor's view describing the condition of the patient. This has changed for accessing electronic information regarding the type of drugs that the patient has consumed through his life. Remember, in the U.S., prescription drugs you cannot get over the counter. This is all kept electronically. I'm not going to go into the legal details of what you could do in order to have access to this information, but it is possible. There's a way to access this information anonymously and by having the name of the individuals. So clinical tests and works are replaced by the analysis of the drugs that the individual has consumed. The issue time for policies would be brought down from 1 to 2 months to 1 to 2 days even. And of course, costs and expenses are considerably reduced. The allocation of the type of risk, if it's a standard risk, or a preferred risk or a substandard risk that could be underestimated, or a risk that I would not be willing to insure, instead of an underwriter doing it, it is done automatically in some cases. And we'll be seeing in a few moments how this is something that an insurer would not be using for underwriting 100% of its portfolio. And this is the way it's been defined from the very beginning. The buts are this. Well, mortality is determined much more certainly when you go through a full-fledged underwriting process. Of course, you have some uncertainty involved here. However, what is thought is that the level of uncertainty is not all that high. And even though we could see a slight increase in mortality, and we'll be discussing the reasons why, well, the savings that you have in costs and the sales increase more than offset this negative effect. And eventually, this gap is a gap that we hope to close. And at the end, well, full-fledged or traditional underwriting is normally the one that is used when you're using people as a distribution channel, whereas streamlined underwriting allows us to start to think about digital platforms for selling insurance. So I was telling you that streamlined underwriting is more than automatic underwriting or a simplified underwriting. Is a way to underwrite using predictive analytics or using just more information or the information that we already have, but in a different way. Like, what type of changes could we see regarding the sources of information? For instance, we replace the medical decisions, be it by the Medical Insurance Bureau, which is an agency that you must have something similar to here. For Mexico is the Oficina Informadora de Impedimentos, which is a bureau in which more than 400 life insurance companies participate. And if you participate, you have access to that information, and you send all the cases regarding life insurance applications with certain information. So you use part of that information in the creation of predictive models. And it is also used, or you also use information related to the drugs that an individual has used, what medications for how long, at what dosage, to infer, health conditions as could be cholesterol, obesity, diabetes, etc. It is used, and it was used before. You use information of the person regarding driving habits. So you would find questions like if you've had tickets, for instance. Now, what you do is that you check this information against vehicle records. So, for instance, what happens here if I see that someone has said, oh, I've never had a speed ticket, and they have like 30 because of speed access. So if he's lying about this, why would I believe in those questions that would, out of logic, have an influence on the answer? So in normal underwriting or traditional underwriting, the questions aimed at evaluating the individual's lifestyle, those questions will continue there. But now we're using the credit scores, the credit history, because there is, in fact, a verified correlation between those that have a good credit history and a healthy lifestyle. So if you look at this, I'm telling you about things that we already knew, that we already had. It's just that we are approaching them or analyzing them in a different way. And what this is leading to or generating is that we'll begin to see in the market companies devoted to either supplying information or even providing a service of information analysis or underwriting itself. If you give me all this information about your potential insured, I can give you a certain score and tell you what type of risk this person is based on the information that is obtained from all the market. So let's focus specifically, or let's look at an example of drugs, for instance. It's been proven, there are several studies that give peace of mind to insurers by analyzing the drugs that a person has used and the prescription and the dosage. This really helps predict very closely their health condition and to find the existence of chronic illnesses or illnesses that could become a risk, how serious they are. However, this has its own limitations. Having access to this source of information does not replace the information that blood work or a urine analysis would give you. We are aware of this limitation. It cannot replace a diagnosis coming from a doctor, because on top of this, you have to check, you have to review. It's not just the medication, the drug, but the combination of drugs that may be giving you additional information. So you need medical expertise to correctly interpret this. And one drug can be used to treat more than one specific illness. So my point is that there is an error margin. It's not perfect. So what other cons do we see in streamlined underwriting? Well, this is definitely something that you cannot apply in a general way. For most cases, companies limit the age range that can use this type of from a commercial point of view, this was a problem, especially for the young people that could be, that was much more likely to qualify as a preferred risk. They could not go through the fully underwriting process, but this is changing. And there are companies in the United States that are using streamlined underwriting only for the underwriting of preferred risk. What they do is that they give a score, and once they have this score, or if they are above that score, they don't have to go to medical tests, etc. Well, the mortality rate will deteriorate. There's no question around that. Of course, there are different views regarding the size of this. There's still not enough evidence so as to say that mortality will deteriorate to such a level. This is more of an anecdotal experience. We still need more information. We still need more time. And we don't have determinate information so as to say what the effect has been in replacing those medical exams with the what is proposed with these underwriting. One of the main limitations is the investment that this implies both in IT and systems as well as in models for those companies that want to implement streamlined underwriting directly. Now, moving more into what we have seen in the United States, let me tell you this. I would say that the balance of things in the United States is very positive. For the most part, all the large insurers are already doing streamlined underwriting. I have quoted three that are publishing this openly, and we know also from others that have been working with this that they're doing it. But all the big ones are doing it or have done it, and the medium-sized insurers are also following this trend. The big insurers have done it directly. They implement this streamlined underwriting process directly. Now, smaller underwriter or smaller insurers have supported themselves on the large ones to start this streamlined underwriting process. And even though everyone accepts the deterioration seen in mortality, everyone accepts also that it is more than offset because of the reduction in costs and because you sell more products. And the market has received this product very well. Even the sales force has, even though there are different opinions regarding this. But the market has received it very well. Consumers have liked it. And will definitely, as predictive analytics evolve, and just as new and better sources of information emerge, the trend is to wait until eventually all companies will join in this process. Of course, these comments are based on a study carried out by the Society of Actuaries. And there are still some issues that have not totally been resolved yet, the main one being mortality. However, it is believed that this gap between fully underwriting processes and streamlined processes will be closing soon. Now, knowing about the drugs that a person has used helps, but it cannot replace 100% clinical testing. And one of the main problems is what happens when someone has not gone to the doctor in a long time and is not aware of having an illness. He was not lying, he simply did not know about it, and he's not taken any medications. Well, that problem's still unresolved. And the problem regarding the lifestyle, well, companies feel that they have that reasonably well covered through the credit history of their clients in many cases. Other problems on which we have to continue working is the non-disclosure, let's say, of things, not to say that they could be lying. From preliminary studies, we can say that approximately 20% of those that say that do not smoke have actually smoked. And because they know that there will be no clinical test to prove it, we can see that between 10 to 20% of people, they seem to feel comfortable lying when this lie will lead them to getting a better rate on their policy. 5% of people understate their weight. No one overestimates their weight. So this should not be a surprise to us. And I'm going to repeat a story that I was sharing yesterday. I don't know if you've had a chance to read a book that it's been out there for some time called Freakonomics. I would define it as a book that confirms that the economy, well, is finally the result of human behaviors. There is no macroeconomic theory that cannot be explained by human reactions. Just for you to have an idea of this type of book, and I really recommend it to you, one of its chapters is called How a Ku Klux Klan member is similar to a real estate agent. And in fact, they have things in common. So the book really shows you how we can explain certain behaviors, and it gives you at the end some justification. So looking at behaviors and actions taken by people, because at the end of the day, we're all humans. And in this book, they make reference to these internet pages where you can look for your soulmate. And part of what you can do is you have to register yourself. And it so happens that 80% of people describe themselves as prettier, richer than what they are, better off regarding their economic and social status. So why would that change here? I'm not saying if I'm going to buy a life insurance policy, I cannot say that I'm dying. It would make no sense. So this is a problem that we have to deal with because there's no way of eliminating it completely. And according to this study done by the Society of Actuaries, how are insurers leading with this issue? Well, by monitoring the agents. This is very important because, well, we have a mix in our portfolio and we said it implicitly more than once. This type of underwriting does not mean simplified underwriting. It's not the type of underwriting that we'll be using for certain specific products. This is really a way to replace fully underwriting processes. This is why it can be applied to standard products. There are no different products, no different tariffs. If I have a certain mix of my portfolio in general, I would not have to be changing it. And if I have some cuts in my sales force. If I have an agent that is selling 5% of its portfolio in a preferred risks, and then when I introduce this type of underwriting, this number goes up to 25, they're attracting the wrong cases, or they learn how to go around the system or turn it around. So you have to monitor agents. The portfolio mix should not have to change, or you have to have some limits imposed. Let's limit it again, or let's increase streamline, but it cannot exceed a certain percentage of preferred risk cases, for instance. That is being done. Audits or checks or random checks are also being applied. Sometimes when you sell a policy, you say you don't have to go through any tests. However, if on a random basis you are selected, we will be asking you to go for medical checks and certain things that we'll be asking from you, and you'll have to accept. And there have been companies where at the very start, they have this process in parallel. They go through the fully underwriting process and also the streamlined process, and I compare it through time to check both performances. So, as we were saying before, when you begin to do new things, you're facing new risks. And this has forced companies to look for a way to identify these new risks and then see how they're able to manage and mitigate them. The main risk that these may bring to us is anti-selection. This is not quantum physics, and the best way to monitor this is by checking that there is no change in the business mix because of this. It may also happen that certain cases that I would have normally declined or rejected, or that I would have classified as substandard and I would have given a higher premium to, may be passed as preferred risks cases. This could happen. Or, as we just said, it could also happen that certain types of illnesses the insured himself or herself was not aware of having, and they would go unadverted because they have not become evident in the individual yet, and this could change my composition in the risk mix. But what type of measures are being adopted by insurers to manage these risks? Well, the first one, and I could say that this is a general measure, is to start with a pilot test. Start with just a certain area and a certain specific product and certain market for some time while you monitor the process more fully. Some companies have hired what they call tele-underwriters. Tele-underwriting. This is an individual that after having filled out your application talks to you and perhaps asks you the same things but in a different way. And these are people that have been trained so that by the tone of voice and the time that you took in answering might guess or evaluate the truthfulness of your answers. People monitoring Monitoring the mix of the different types of risks are also mitigation techniques used for the new risks. Reinsurance. If the reinsurer feels comfortable with the model that you created and with what you're doing, use reinsurance. And something that is very important also for mitigating and managing these risks, which is the predictive model that you will build. You'll have to build it in such a way that by removing or adding variables or sources of information, you will only have to go through a very straight, simple process. If I build a very sophisticated model, so sophisticated and so predictive that including a new variable implies a 6-month work, no, that's impossible. Your model has to be very dynamic. It must be very easy to be optimized as time passes. And companies must be very alert and very aware of the emergence of any new sources of information. So now, how has this been implemented? How could we implement this in our own businesses? Well, in general, we have identified the fact that there is a framework of best practices of implementation.
The streamlined underwriting should not be a change of processes, an isolated change of processes. It must involve different areas, and as Arturo said, it must follow a business strategy. We are doing it because there is a business objective behind it. So the first stage of implementation are the foundations. And the first step is, let's say, I want to start doing streamlined underwriting. How is this linked to my business strategy? Why do I want to do it? Because I want to make savings, because I want to improve the client's experience, because I would like to make headway in terms of innovation or digitalization. So part of the strategy, for instance, and this is a key step, companies have to decide on what percentage of cases I want to underwrite in this way. Never start with 100. I want just 20% of cases to go through this underwriting process, and the remaining 80% will be underwritten totally. Or I want this type of risk to be streamlined, and the rest should be the usual system. So this is basic, because this will determine the time, the construction of the model, the definition of the process itself. The next step is to determine the sources of information, both internal and external. And here we must mention that in order to use internal data, many insurance companies have made huge investments to digitalize historical information. This is a very sturdy investment. And third, I have the ability, the capability to do it internally. Do I have the experts in predictive modeling? Do I have the data scientists? Do I have the medical expertise needed? And then, do they have time? Will they be able to give us their time to construct and monitor the models? Which tools will be used? This is a systems decision. And then government, internal or corporate government decisions. Who is going to decide the model to be used? Who is going to decide when to add or remove variables? Which will be the decision-making process? Will it be the sales director? All those decisions must be a priori. And finally, what questions can I ask according to each country's regulation? Because some of them are considered discriminatory. So all of these are things that will limit my perfect model. So the technically perfect model can be limited if I don't have very clear in my mind all these definitions before I start building the model. The next stage is the analysis. Usually, the underwriting policies don't change just because I implement the streamlined underwriting process. Usually, it's the same policies. Probably the pilot test will reduce the amounts insured and the age range, but not but only for this process. I am not going to make them go through this type of underwriting. And then comes the construction of the predictive model. This is the core of the project, and this is where I need genius minds, but I also need validation. And validation is done with companies that start doing dual underwriting. But there are some companies that take a percentage of their portfolio that was already underwritten. The model is run, and they will see the results. That is a very practical approach to see the effectiveness of the model. The same percentage of risks qualified to be insured, the same percentage was qualified as normal or preferred. And something very important, the model must be alive. The model must be ever-changing and evolving constantly. The third stage is decision-making. Some decisions that impact not just the predictive model or the processes, but also at the business level. So I just mentioned the example of the fact that 20% of the people lie about being smokers. So this is a real life example of a company that had a combination of portfolio 5% smokers and 95 non-smokers, and that's how they rated. So they said, I am going to assume that 15% are smokers. I am going to assume that they are going to lie to me, so I will adjust my rates accordingly. Communication, and communication is divided into two areas. Internal communication to explain what's the new role in the policies that go through this type of underwriting. But a very important communication is external. I must tell the client, the customer, well, in this case, your policy will be approved very easily. And the same with the sales force. So here you have to strike a balance very carefully. On the one hand, I want to tell you that you can do all of these without making all these analysis, but I don't want to open the door so that all the policies that were rejected by other companies can be approved here. So they don't want to be part of the random tests. And finally, implementation is the last step, but no least important. We have to test the model live so that I feed the information and I get an answer in a matter of hours, because if it takes 1 week, it's absolutely useless. So we have to make sure that the implementation works. What normally happens is that companies start by small. And as they feel more comfortable, not just agents, underwriters, the company as a whole, the process grows in importance and in products. Which are the key considerations? And I think we already mentioned some of them. To be able to underwrite using other sources of information, all of them have to be electronic, automating most of the underwriting procedure and revision or review. The fact that, well, modeling is key. A strong and robust predictive model is key for the success of this project. Acknowledging that the mortality assumptions will have to change as this type of underwriting becomes more popular. But something very important is that companies that are doing it since they began with the project, the objective is being mortality neutral. This is not something I'm going to do to improve my mortality experience. In the best of cases, I want to be the same. That's the goal. And something very important is the last bullet. In order to start this underwriting process, you don't have to change your products or your rates. Companies in the U.S. are basically following two paths for this implementation. Either they do it directly, and this is what the large companies do. I use my own information to develop my models. I test it. I decide which variables I determine the information we are going to use. And something that is very important, they are thinking about, and this is a very subtle difference, what we are doing with the predictive model is to imitate what an underwriter will do, not to try to predict mortality. So try to predict which would be the reaction of the underwriter vis-a-vis all of these information. So it's very important for underwriters to be involved throughout the process and in the constant review. That also helps from a technical point of view, and I am not an expert in predictive modeling. These type of models can be developed faster and with less information, but you must always keep in mind the variable you are trying to predict and the reaction of the underwriter vis-a-vis certain types of information. And this definition is a combination of underwriting rules and results from the predictive model. So in summary, doing it directly has a lot of benefits. It's specific to your business. Following your own underwriting criteria, you can test it with your own information. You have total control over the model. You decide when to add or when to delete variables, and you don't have to rely on third parties. Just acquisition of third-party data if you consider that data valuable. Which are the drawbacks? Well, definitely you need experts. You need a very specialized expertise to develop these models. You need medical expertise as well. You need to get reinsurance on board if use reinsurance on impacted block. And above all, you need technological infrastructure. What happens if my decision is to implement it through a reinsurer? And I won't dwell on these, but definitely reinsurers have been of great help in the U.S., and they can give you a broad range of services. They can help you to provide information and give you the scoring and do the underwriting for you. So each company decides to what extent they're going to use reinsurers and use their own calculation models. Which are the benefits? Well, the benefit is that you don't need to wait for the whole volume. You can implement it immediately. You don't need the in-house experience. You don't need the data scientists in-house. The test of the model has already been done because reinsurers have invested and proven those variables. And you can prove the models with your information if you can provide the information. The reinsurer is often willing to give you support with professionals and physicians to do the underwriting. And of course, they are always willing to take an important percentage of your portfolio if you're working with them. Which are the drawbacks? And this can be like a black box. You don't have total control, that's a fact. Maybe you have a totally different business profile, different from the typical in the market. So it will not, the model will not be necessarily tailored according to your risk profile or your portfolio. And in some cases, you would have to pay for this service. So it's an additional cost. But in conclusion, I think that what's important to take away is that streamlined underwriting offers a new option, a new alternative, not just to improve the consumer experience, but to reach other markets. I mentioned it on passing, but it's a good way to reach markets where people don't go because the amounts insured may not be attractive. I don't know whether I would like to do it because of the cost of underwriting, but particularly in the new generations, which are more prone to buy through internet. All the important insurance in the United States are adopting this process, even in small pilot tests, and the medium-sized insurers are also doing it. Companies that want to do it, they already have a broad range of sources of information to work with. And although we acknowledge that it's a practical way to improve the purchasing experience, the buying experience, and reduces costs, increases our sales and our profits, but there is uncertainty, and there is the risk that mortality will rise. However, we consider that this is something we have to do. In fact, everybody's advancing in this area, and all sectors are moving into digitalization and innovation, and life insurance cannot be left behind. So this is not something far in the future. I fully agree with Arturo. This is something we must consider right away and start considering its adoption. Although in Latin America as a whole, maybe I am wrong, but as far as I know, a key information, which is information on medications electronically, is not always available or is not reliable in most of our countries. But I think that there are lots of sources of information that will not fully eliminate the clinical tests, or well, they can help us to reintroduce little by little certain alternatives to normal underwriting so that we can start using this type of underwriting. And finally, repeating what Arturo was saying, this is a project which is already here. It's part of the present, and the first day of the long term is today. Don't forget that. So we will have to reassess what can we do rather than why couldn't we do it. Well, I have 4 more minutes for questions. You can ask questions to me or to Arturo. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to do so. Good morning. The automatic underwriting and the streamlining is very important. But how about personal and family management? If we want to sell life insurance to a particular individual. So the client, for instance, says, I want this type of coverage, but the client is not told why he should take this coverage and the insured values. Well, this is a good question. Really, I did not cover that topic, and you are very right. What we have to think about in this case is that within the sales process as a whole, or the business process, underwriting is just one part of it. It's just one component. There is still the need to reach new markets, to meet new needs, and the message is that this is just a tiny little bit that can help us where the market demands this part of the process to change. But this does not eliminate the need to look for more efficient ways so that we can help the consumer directly to understand the risk they have to be covered for. This just removes the time-consuming analysis and the visit to the physician. But I am not helping to know the coverage required or the amount insured. That has to be a separate part of the process. Good morning. Well, I have a big question mark. Which has been the result of the moral risk that you see in this type of models? What do you mean by moral risk? Well, we live in a fantastic country. This is a spectacular country with a broad range of geographical areas. We have abundance of resources. Unfortunately, we also have some people that use life insurance to profit from them and for other types of circumstances. That moral risk that you can determine through a medical assessment or a traditional underwriting process, So this is a big question mark for me, because certainly many people will come through that do not just hide tiny little information, but for instance, money laundering and things like that. Well, definitely the moral risk increases, rises. And part of the techniques we are using to mitigate this risk, well, we openly have to acknowledge that it is not eliminated. For instance, the call to ask questions, or the same questions asked differently, and because of the tone of voice. There are other technologies. Some take pictures, and determine based on the expression on your face whether you are reliable or not. Random visits, complete underwriting of a policy which I issued with a streamlined underwriting. So randomly we can do some checks, and we have found that some cases just filter through. That's bad. But the good news is that these are not very many. The techniques to mitigate the risks are working, but it's not eliminated, and I think it would be a lie to say that the moral risk will go away. Well, very quickly, Marcela. In our countries, most of our large businesses don't have any underwriting. Uh, for instance, the bank's portfolio. I think that the simplified underwriting is a way to start doing underwriting in businesses where we are not currently working, and we can use more fair rates vis-a-vis the traditional models. Yes, that's totally true, and that's why I think it's very important to understand that this is not a simplified underwriting. For those businesses, what you have to do is simplified underwriting. But let me go back to your question. Is this for the consumer or the potential client? We have not convinced. I will spend 2 months and you tell me that you're going to die, so you won't be selling me a policy. So this is to access a different kind of market without changing our products. We are not redoing our products. I just have to improve the buying experience to reach that market that doesn't buy an insurance because they feel it's invasive. Will I convince everyone? No. But maybe if they undergo tests and they are perfectly healthy, maybe I could have sold them. Let me give you another example. We had a process in a company where internally by system we have to approve the expenses of your direct reports. 99% of the expenses were approved. 99%. And however, a lot of man hours, time, systems, filing was spent, and in 99% of the cases they said yes. So it was eliminated. So the approval process was only left for very high expenditures or unusual expenditures. So there are some things we do by habit, out of habit. Maybe we don't need to do that anymore. Maybe we change the approach. I can close a deal, which in the past I didn't have the possibility to do it. Do we have any more time? Well, the light is still green. Good morning, Marcela. Maybe you could illustrate and give us some information about teleselection, and that is the impact on the results account, which means teleselection not doing anything or doing medical screening. The difference between among the three of them is very big. No, we don't have a figure. We just have anecdotal references that it has been helpful, but we don't have a figure. We just have the numbers I showed. Approximately 20% of the people lie in terms of being smokers. 5% they lie in terms of saying how much is their body weight. But well, I don't know. Do we have any further questions? Arturo, would you like to add any further comments? The topics are very closely related, though Arturo's presentation was more comprehensive. Well, otherwise, thank you very much for the invitation and thank you for your attention.